essential competencies in product management career progression, right? What we thought would be very important for this session is to not just talk about some of the skills and competencies that are required in product management, which is, I guess, covered elsewhere, but also give you a little bit of a framework that I have used in the past in order to do performance evaluations with my manager from these competency evaluation standpoint. And this might be a good framework for all of us to take back as well. As I walk through, I'll explain what that framework is, but for all of us to take back and see where do we stand in terms of the skill sets that are required for product management, and then take forward, right? So that's essentially what we want to cover today. Broadly, we will be exploring a little bit on what is the product management role, but a major portion of our time we will spend on what are the necessary skill sets for product management, and we will look at how those skill sets are further broken down into different competencies, right? So we'll talk about 4 different skill sets. Those 4 different skill sets have 3 sub divisions each, which are the 12 competencies that we'll talk about. And then we will look at how would you, as an individual where you stand today, evaluate your own capability in terms of those different skill sets and figure out how do you stand as a product manager as you as of today, right? And what are the areas where you need to improve in order to make progress, right? And towards the end, if we have some time, we'll also look at what are the different career levels broadly through which a product manager gets promoted or gets elevated across their career. And during those stages, what are the different kinds of skills, or how do these 12 competencies that we're going to talk about change as the professional grows in their career, right? Something becomes more important, something becomes less important, and so on and so forth. However, all of these skill sets that competencies that we'll be talking about is necessary to some degree in most of the levels, right? So with that, we will get started. This is not something unknown to, I believe, all the folks who are enthusiasts of product management career, but something that I wanted to stress a little bit more before we actually dive in, right? So unlike other skills, product management is not just a job, right? It's a thrilling adventure. Product management is a multi-skilled role that thrives at the intersection of creativity, strategy, leadership, right? To be a good product manager, you need to be more than a one-trick pony, right? So you need to understand a little bit of multiple things, right? You need to understand the industry, you need to understand product strategy, you need to understand how to work seamlessly with engineers, mastering stakeholder management, exhibiting leadership, and many more things, right, which we'll look at. And all of this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? The role may seem complex, but it is tailored for those individuals who have an entrepreneurial spirit, right? So if you love the idea of running your own business or assuming more responsible roles within your organization, become a general manager, etc., and are willing to roll up your sleeves and get scrappy, then product management is a super rewarding career and a very fulfilling career that you can imagine, right? And that's why you would see people from different walks of life or different careers are drawn to this exhilarating role, right? In my career itself, I've seen engineers, salespeople, marketers, even medical professionals, testers, support individuals, various different kinds of professionals becoming product managers and then delivering exceptional products, right? So as you embark this journey, I think this is probably one of the first few steps that you're taking in order to learn what product management is. I would just like to stress and emphasize on the fact that your work, and this is what Steve Jobs says, and as a pretty important quote that I find very close to myself, is your work is going to fill up a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to believe is to love what you really do, right? So for those individuals who like all the things that I mentioned about and the competencies that we are going to talk about, if you're really excited about it, then investing your time in becoming a product manager is a pretty important skill, right? And I take a lot of pride in I have also transitioned into product management without going through a regular MBA degree, which is sometimes thought of as a way to get into product management. But I take a lot of pride in helping individuals who are interested in making that transition, and then see how it can help them, right? So with that, the question is, what do you think are some of the key skills that are required for somebody to become a product manager? I'd just like to clarify a few before I go deeper, right? So a couple of things I'll correct, right? Programmer. You absolutely don't need to be a programmer in order to become a product manager, right? There is a myth that only the engineers can become product managers, and that's a huge myth, right? Whatever walk of life you come from, right? Whatever your career is, you can actually become a product manager, right? Product managers are not required to code or even understand what's written in the code, right? For that, you have a team, which is called engineering. All right. And then all of the other things, I think in some form or shape, is what product managers do, right? So amazing. Thanks for putting in your thoughts there, right? So with that, we will deep dive, right? The way I want to break this down is to structure. I think all of you have put in a couple of items that are actually the skills that a product manager requires, but they are slightly, slightly more granular, nuanced. Some of them are also high level. For example, stakeholder management is actually a broader skill, right? Problem solving is a broad skill, right? But I wanted to give it a little bit of a structure and then deep dive into the different areas, so that when you think about building your career as a product manager, you can actually focus on some of those capabilities as you go, right? So product management, like you can imagine, is a combination of multiple hard and soft skills. Some of that you've mentioned here, right? Then you could also say that product management requires us to learn a couple of tools and technologies. People might name a bunch of tools: Google Analytics, Figma, SQL, etc. But broadly, the things that I'm going to focus about is what are the most key areas that a product manager focuses on, right? And what we will be talking about today is a framework that is utilized by, or that is popularized by, a very known product management professional in the industry, right? He's a top voice in product management. His name is Ravi Mehta. He's been a director of product at Facebook, now called Meta, VP or Chief Product Officer at Tinder, and a bunch of other great places, right? And today runs his own company. This framework is called as Ravi Mehta's Product Competency Framework, right? And like I was mentioning in the introduction, this is something that I've used in my past organization for my own performance evaluation with my manager, as well as for some of my reports, right? So let's begin by looking at these 4 areas, right? So the first one is called product execution, right? Product execution, like it's mentioned in the brackets, is the ability to build exceptional products, right? So if you think about building a product, right? Take the example of Amazon, Netflix, etc. These are all products, right? You can also think of, a car, let's say a Mercedes Benz or an Ola Scooty. All of these are products. Now, product generally, unless you are actually building the product, all your skills in terms of stakeholder management, your skills in terms of product strategy, etc., do not matter, right? So it is super important as a product manager to know how can you take a strategy and deliver that into a product, right? And in doing so, you're working with multiple stakeholders in the organization, like engineering, design. If you are in an organization that's ops heavy, for example, an Ola or a Zepto or a Zomato, you're working with a lot of operations people, right? You're working with legal, you're working with marketing, you're working with go-to-market strategy, etc., right? So you're bringing all of these teams together and ensuring that all these teams are lined up and doing their work properly for the product to get launched, right? So the ability to make sure impediments are removed, project is happening on time, and you are bringing together all of these stakeholders is a super important skill, right? And I've seen in my career, there are certain product managers who are super strategic focus, right? But if they can't do execution well, right, they might be very smart, right? They could really come up with great ideas, right? But if they're not able to get products executed, if they're not able to move the needle on execution, then strategy alone doesn't help, right? In fact, there's a quote that I read somewhere which says, execution eats strategy for breakfast, right? You can Google that up, right? So execution is super important. Vivek, yes, we'll go into another slide where we'll talk about execution, but essentially, you can think of it like this. You have a strategy, let's say it is WhatsApp, right? And you need to launch ads on WhatsApp. How do you ensure that you bring the engineering team, design team together so that they're actually working and getting it delivered, right? And while at this point, it might seem super easy that, okay, I have created a product specification, I have built the design with my design team, it should just get delivered, but it's not that easy, right? When you're working in a matrixed organization, you have dependencies with other teams, you have timelines to meet, you have multiple competing strategies. And in the middle of that, getting the project launched and launched in the right way, right? It's not just about launching, but when you're launching, how are you communicating with your customers? What is the go-to-market strategy that you're choosing? How are you taking feedback from your customers and improving the product, etc., right? So all of that is part of execution. The next thing is customer insights, right? This is something that some of us who are interested in product management might have already heard, right? So as a product manager, you are the person who's speaking the most with your customers, right? Engineers don't go and talk. They might, but for most parts, product manager is the person who's going and speaking with customers, right? And you as the individual is who's looked upon within the organization as the voice of the customer, right? And sometimes that means two things. One is you are looked upon as the person who brings those insights, but the second is a responsibility, right? That when somebody is taking a decision, let's say, for example, an engineering manager is saying that, this is the design of the product and this is how we should build it, right? But you quickly realize that the design that is being proposed will not be very easy for your customers to use. Let's say, for example, your customers are a cohort of individuals who are not well educated in a certain language, right? You can't make the application super complex. Or if your customers are not too tech savvy, right? And you are building a digital product, you have to make it super easy for them, right? So that aspect, right? There's a little bit of a design aspect that I spoke here, but essentially, how do you bring that customer knowledge that you've gained through several mechanisms and bring that knowledge into your product design making is what is customer insights, right? So there's again a popular quote, which is what I don't know who said the quote, but it goes like this, right? It says if it was actually told by Henry Ford, right? I now remember. If I asked people what they wanted, they would have asked for faster horses, right? So that's the quote. And this was spoken by Henry Ford, who's basically the designer or the company owner of Ford, who started Ford, right? And the first product that they made was a car, which is Ford Model T, right? So how do you also understand some of the hidden needs of the customers and then bring it into your product management journey, right? So that's also an important skill. The third one is product strategy, right? So while I was talking about product execution, I was also talking about product strategy, right? So product strategy is bare bones ideas, right? What are the ideas where your company or your product should go invest, right? And it might seem simple because if you take any product, right? If you take, let's say, again, pick any app that you love, right? Whether it's a Hotstar, an Amazon, right? Or a WhatsApp. And if I ask you, what should be the feature that we should build, right? Or what are the challenges with this particular product? Everybody here would be able to provide some ideas, right? So if you think about it, ideas are abundant, right? Any product that you pick up in today's world, take for example Zoom that you're talking about, talking on, or Google Slides on which the slides are. If you were to think about one modification that needs to happen, you would be able to think about those modifications, right? But strategy essentially comes in when you are able to evaluate different things which are happening within your company and outside of your company, right? And bring that into building your products, right? So for example, there's a lot of macroeconomic situations that are happening in the industry today because of firstly COVID, and then because of inflation in a couple of countries, right? The funding winter has started, right? Where we were seeing a lot of unicorns being churned out of India about a year back and across the world, but that has slowed down significantly, right? Investment has slowed down significantly, right? At the same time, some of the established companies like Microsoft, Google, etc., are also facing difficulties because the interest rates have risen, and that is leading to some of these companies not being able to take loans because of the higher interest rates. So given this industry, right, and then there is ChatGPT, right? There's a influx of AI and AI-based tools, right? So there are a lot of things happening in the industry. The demands of the customers are changing. Customers are becoming more cost conscious, right? So given that, how does an industry or a product evolve so that they are able to retain their customers and take them forward, right? So that is what product strategy is all about. If you think about, questions that you should, think about, for example, from product strategy standpoint is, why did Slack, which is a communication tool, get acquired by Salesforce, which is basically a CRM or a customer relationship management software, right? Or should Book My Show sort of enter into the virtual gaming industry, right? So those are certain aspects of product strategy, right? How can you figure out who your customers are, what's happening in the industry, and then make choices, right? And finally, the last one is influencing people or stakeholder management, right? So this is, how do you bring different people in your organization together, keep them motivated, and rally them in order to achieve your company's goals? So with that, now I want to actually get into that framework, right? And we'll talk about what are, we'll also do a deep dive into all 12 of these that you can see here, right? But if you think about it, the 12 competencies that we spoke about, right? So we spoke about customer insight, we spoke about product strategy, we spoke about influencing people, and we spoke about product execution, right? Each of them can be further distributed into three other types of competencies within each, right? So, and we'll talk about what these competencies are and what they include. But if you think about customer insights, it's about fluency with data, being the voice of the customer, and user experience design. On the product strategy side, it's business outcome ownership, road mapping, strategic impact, influencing people, managing up, team leadership, stakeholder management. And on execution side, it's specifications, delivery, quality assurance, right? So somebody actually spoke about project management as a skill, right? So within product execution, project delivery is actually a skill which is very close to, for example, a project manager, right? So those are also certain things, agile project management, right? So those are certain skills which are also important, right? Now, the way this framework is used, or the way I've used it in the past, or the way Ravi Mehta suggests we use this is basically a web, right? And it has three areas, right? One which says needs focus, one which says on track, and the other one which says outperform, right? So you can think of it as this one being, you're almost there, right? This is, you need to work on this particular skill, right? And outperform essentially means you're exceptional in this particular area, right? So you're doing better than what 90 percentile of the product managers are doing out there, right? The way this is used is you basically figure out where do you stand, right? You take a printout of this, you figure out that on each of these skills, for example, stakeholder management, you might think that you are on track with stakeholder management skill, right? Product vision and road mapping, maybe you're starting afresh, so it's an area where you need focus, right? Similarly, business, etc., right? So you put all of the circles and then you make a graph, something of this nature, right? Which tells you that in this particular framework, where do you land, right? And the goal is, how can you expand these outside, right? So that's how this particular framework works. And now we will look at what are the skill sets within each of those competency areas, right? So as to get a little more deeper view into each of them. So we'll start with fluency on data. All of us have heard that in product management, data is very, very important, right? Everybody talks about data-backed decisions. How do you use data in order to look at some of your metrics, right? There are several metrics that are spoken about in product management, right? Things like customer acquisition cost, session lengths, right? Depending on the industry again. So if you take, for example, Netflix, a product manager would be interested in knowing what is the subscription rate, what is the total revenue, what is the average watch time of the individual spending time on Netflix, right? Similarly, if you take Airbnb would be interested in knowing what are the number of room nights booked, what is the average cost of transaction, right? Which country am I seeing the most transactions from, right? Airbnb is a marketplace. So there is a supply side where hosts are putting in their homes, and there is a demand side where people are going and booking those homes. So you want to see what is the ratio of, are there areas where, there is dearth of hosts to people who want to visit, etc., right? So there are various metrics that you see. And the product decisions that you make are based on those metrics. For example, if you are an Airbnb, right? Again, let's take the example of Netflix, right? You see that a lot of customers this particular year are dropping off, right? You need to go and analyze what happened. People are stopping their subscriptions, right? So you would go and look at using data. Firstly, where are people dropping off, right? Is there a specific geography where people are dropping off? Is there a specific device using which people are dropping off, right? Did we launch anything new, right, which is causing people to drop off? Did we increase our prices, right? Is there a specific category of people, right? For example, males in India below the age group of, let's say, 35 that are dropping off, etc., right? So data is super important, and that helps you in making decisions in terms of what should come into your roadmap, right? So fluency with data, how do you prioritize features, ability to have right conversations with data experts is one of the important skills, right? The next one is voice of the customer. So I already spoke a little bit about that, right? But essentially here, one is you are the advocates of the customers, but there are certain hard skills that you also need to learn in terms of how do you do research, right? It's not as easy as going and speaking to a customer. You need to be prepared. You need to find out how can you time box a certain research, get insights so that you can build your product, right? And in doing so, depending on the industry that you're working in, what is the best way to conduct a research? For example, if you are a B2C company, like a Zepto, you might, or a Swiggy Instamart, you might be using surveys, or you might be looking at a lot of data that is collected from an interaction standpoint to make a decision, right? And a lot of experiments happen in this particular space, right? For example, I have to price a particular product on Swiggy, right? Or Amazon, let's say, I will put the max price and release it with certain individuals. I will provide a discount to certain individuals and then see which price sticks the most, right? To find out what would be the optimal price of that product, right? So that's an example. If you are a B2C company, that's a way of doing conducting research as well and finding out information, right? Similarly, you can do a lot of surveys, right? So you might have seen surveys come up on YouTube, for example, right? Which asks you questions, right? So that's also a good way of gathering information when you are B2C, when you are dealing with millions of customers, right? So that's a good way. But if you're a B2B, for example, a Salesforce or an Atlassian or Microsoft selling cloud products like Azure, you also need to go and talk to your customers, right? And sometimes you might be talking to some of your largest customers. For example, Microsoft might be talking to some of their largest banks, right? And at the same time, some of the small startups as well that is using Microsoft Azure in order to gather data, right? So there are several ways in which you can get insights from the customers and then use that in order to do product development, right? So that's basically voice of the customer. The next one is user experience design. Again, as a product manager, you don't do the final design work, right? So there is generally a group of people called designers who would come and do the design work. But as a product manager, it is important to collaborate with the designer and have a very good understanding of whether the design is going to work for your customers or not, right? Again, here, because you are the voice of the customer or you are the customer expert, you need to ensure that you're working very closely with your designer to ensure that the right design gets delivered, right? It's not just important for the product to work, but it's also important that it works seamlessly for your customers, right? Then coming to the strategic part, right? So there were three things that we had. So what we discussed right now is the customer insight part, fluency with data, voice of the customer, user experience design. So these are skills that you need to hone as you build your customer insight sort of muscle, right? The next one is product strategy, right? It has three skills, like we spoke: business outcome ownership, product vision, strategic impact, right? So from a business outcome ownership standpoint, and this is a very crucial role. So as you get more senior into a product role, ensuring, and if it is a smaller company, by the way, even some of the early stage product managers own some business outcomes, right? Where they are essentially responsible for, let's say, a business outcome like a revenue, right? Or a high retention among their customers, or driving more traffic on their product, right? Or reducing churn on the product, right? Or increasing engagement on the product, right? So some sort of a business outcome ownership is also super important, right? How much money do you invest behind building a product? What kind of money will it bring to you? How are you going to get profitability, etc., right? Those are certain things which product managers also need to think as they grow in their careers, right? Then product vision, essentially, how do you take care of all the things that are happening inside and outside of your organization, and then make a vision for your product that is compelling enough, right? So for example, if you think about Apple, Apple launched the iPhone and then later launched the App Store, right? The Apple App Store. Everybody had a question as to what is this App Store going to do, right? Steve Jobs or somebody in that organization said that the App Store is actually going to be the moat as to why people will continue to use Apple products, right? Without the apps, and if you think about it, right? Think about Android or Apple, whichever phone you use, right? You would not be using those products if they did not have the apps, right? You would not just use them for calling. You would, let's say one of these platforms drops their app store on one day, you're going to automatically migrate to others, right? So that is product vision, right? How do you create that compelling strategy for you to gain customers, right? Amazon Prime is again a great example, right? It's a very economical product that is offered to the customers, but it's a way to bind customers through OTT also into Amazon's delivery itself, right? As soon as you have a Prime subscription, you automatically start ordering on Amazon because it gives you a one-day delivery, it removes some delivery fee, it gives you some discounts and things like that, right? So that's the product vision part of your strategy, right? And then finally, strategic impact, right? So you think about business outcomes, you create a vision, but ultimately you also need to make sure that you are achieving the numbers or the targets that you're thinking about, right? So it is also a super important thing, right? Because this framework is also used to evaluate product managers, it is important that whatever metric they have determined, they're actually moving on it, right? So for example, if I have a metric as a product manager which says, I'm going to increase the revenue on my particular product by 10% by the end of the year, strategic impact is what helps us measure that particular metric, right? So then coming to this piece, right, which is influencing people, it has three areas: stakeholder management, team leadership, and managing up, right? So all of these three are slightly different, look pretty similar, but I'll talk about what these means, right? So stakeholder management essentially means how are you able to influence the stakeholders that very closely work with you and the stakeholders that are in and around your organization, right? And I'm not talking about customers here, right? Customers is something that we spoke to earlier. This is just the stakeholders within the organization, right? So as a product manager, you're working very closely with engineering and design team, and you talk to them almost on a daily basis, right? But there are stakeholders outside who also influence your delivery, right? So for example, there are engineers, designers, product managers, not in your organization, but a different organization, right? Let's take the example of Microsoft. You are a product manager on ChatGPT, right, which was recently acquired by Microsoft. And you now need to figure out strategically, how do I integrate this particular product in the other products within the Microsoft suite, right? Such as Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint, etc., right? You need to work with those teams, right? So automatically those teams become your stakeholders. If you're working in Zepto, right, and you are building the experience for dark stores. Dark stores is essentially where organizations like Zepto store the products that they deliver, right? It's generally a store where nobody goes to purchase. It's very close in your locality, right? So now you're building an application which allows a person who's working in that dark store to pick the products as quickly as possible when an order comes and give it to a delivery boy standing outside so that they can pick up the product and deliver the product within, let's say, 15 minutes, right? So when you're building that particular app, the delivery person, the person who's in the dark store, the person who's arranging products in the dark store, all of them become your stakeholders, right? So it's super important that you maintain great relations with your stakeholders, right? So that you can bring in their, you can bring in those insights during product development, but if you are able to work collaboratively with all of these teams, it becomes easier for you to get a product delivered. The next one is team leadership, right? Often as a product manager, what's going to happen is you will be, for example, get a lot of escalations, right? That, hey, you launched this particular product and this is breaking, this is not working properly, right? One of the aspects of team leadership is how do you take all of that noise, and by noise, I don't mean it's not something you should fix, but how do you take all of that noise, filter it, and only share the right information with the engineering and design team so that their focus doesn't break, right? So you sort of act as that top level and ensure you're protecting your team, right? Because one of the things that is told about engineering time is that engineering time is measured in diamonds, right? That's time you actually use in order to get the product delivered, right? So the more protection you can provide them so that their time is not lost is super important, right? So that's an aspect of team leadership, for example, right? Secondly, how do you keep the teams motivated about your vision? Often as a product manager, I've heard that, my engineering team does not understand what is the vision, why are they building something, right? And when somebody doesn't understand why are they doing a certain thing, right? You might have witnessed that in your roles as well, right? They're not motivated enough. They're not bought in to do that, right? So how do you as a product manager ensure that you're over communicating with your team members, explaining them exactly why we need to do this is super important, right? One of the things in product management is that as a product manager, it's a leadership role even at the most junior level, right? Even if you're a 3 years experienced product manager, you're still in leadership. But the interesting part is nobody reports into you, right? Engineers don't report into a product manager, designers don't report into a product manager, right? So a lot of what a product manager does is by influencing people. So the skill on how do you influence this group of individuals and still get something delivered while they're not reporting into you is a super important skill, right? Some of you might have been managers in your role, right? And if you're a manager and you have some reports reporting into you, it's easier to get something delivered, right? But it is tough to get teams to deliver things where they are not reporting into you, right? So that is where team leadership, influencing, etc. come in, right? And the other key part is managing up, right? So this was stakeholders, teams, but you also need to bring your leadership along, keep them informed on what's happening, and also take their help wherever required, right? You might not always be able to solve certain things, right? For example, there is a team which comes and says that, hey, again, take Microsoft Word, right? Microsoft Word comes back and tells ChatGPT product manager that, hey, I cannot spend time integrating ChatGPT in Word in this particular quarter, right? Because I already have my roadmap filled. And by no logical reason you're able to convince them, right? That is when you involve leadership to figure out what is the company's priority and where should the investment be, and then bring in more headcount or whatever lever that is, reduce some scope, do a quick launch, etc., right? But that is where you need to bring leadership in, right? That just doesn't mean bringing the leadership in, but how do you keep them informed as you're building the project, keep them informed of the right things in the right level of detail, doing the right communication, etc. Super important. Coming to the last part, which is product execution. Again, there are 3 aspects to it. One is feature specifications, right? One of the key skills, and Amazon talks a lot about this, is exceptional writing skills. If you are a product manager, it is super important for you to be able to write great documents, because those documents are used as sources for doing development, doing design, creating go-to-market strategies, etc. Right? So having the ability to write exceptional documents, ability to write product requirement documents, user stories, whatever framework that you use in your company for product development, whether it is agile, waterfall, it's mostly agile these days, Scrum, etc. You need to have the capability to specify your products properly, right? And then product delivery. This is where the project management hat comes in. There are certain companies where product managers are supported either by project managers, technical program managers, or such personas in order to get the delivery done. But in certain cases, as a product manager as well, you need to have those skills where you're able to define timelines, you're able to ensure that the timelines are met. If the timelines are not met at the right time, you escalate the risks to your leadership or to the required stakeholders, to your customers. You find out creative ways to get things delivered. If there are interdependencies between multiple teams, you figure out how those interdependencies are sorted, etc. Right? So all of those project management aspects to deliver the product on time is what is product delivery, right? And finally, there's quality assurance. So one of the things, again, in product management that we speak about is MVPs, minimum viable product. How do we ship quickly so that we can get more value and do not wait for an elongated period of time to ship something, because by the time you ship, then the requirements might have changed, right? But in the hustle of building quickly, we should also ensure that the quality doesn't take a hit, right? So quality is super important because if you ship low quality products, you will lose customers very quickly, right? You might be launching soon, but customers are lost pretty quickly, right? So these are essentially the 12 capabilities that are important for a product manager, right? So this particular diagram, by the way, is something that I had created about 2 years back, right? But it's a reflection of what my skill sets were almost when I was 3 to 4 years experienced, right? So I did a reflection activity, when I was doing performance management with my manager, right? To just think about historically when I started my product management journey as to where did I stand across some of these skill sets, right? So this is how my graph looked. Of course, this was historically me thinking how it looked, right? So it might not be the most accurate. But then when I was doing the performance evaluation, I also created what is something that I thought was my graph at that time, right? And the graph keeps changing. So if I draw this today, it might be slightly different, right? So essentially the exercise that we did is, based on how I was performing across all of these areas, we put dots on each of these areas and created this graph, right? And then found out ways in which I can bridge the gaps in areas where I need attention. For example, strategic impact, user experience design, right? Voice of the customer, etc. So if you see here, product execution was a very strong suit that I had at that point. Managing up was also pretty good. On the and I was new in the organization, so I wasn't contributing so much strategically. So that became an area that I should contribute to, as well as speak with more customers and find more insights, right? Cool. So with that, we are coming up to the last slide for this deck. This is also a reflection of how PMs progress through their careers. So generally, these are the roles that a PMs have. Again, these are not the only roles, but these are the most common ones, right? So generally starts with an associate product manager, then a product manager, senior product manager, group product manager, director of product, senior director of product, VP of product, and then chief product officer, right? So again, depending on the role, you would see that the graphs change a little bit, right? So if you see an APM, product delivery is important, but execution is important, but in that they're more focused on feature specification and quality assurance, right? Rest of the areas are low focus. As somebody becomes a product manager, you need to focus on feature specification, also on product delivery, right? So as soon as you become a product manager, you're expected to own delivery as well, right? When you are an APM, you're basically reporting into a product manager or a senior product manager in doing so. You also need to build your skills around data a little bit, speak with a lot of customers, etc., right? Team leadership and strategic things is something that is still, something that you're owning or learning, right? As you become senior, you will see that, you're pretty similar to what a PM does, but in addition to that, you start owning a roadmap by yourself. Stakeholder management becomes very important, right? And so on and so forth, right? So I'm not going to track this through, but essentially, this is again how your skills improve as we go.